The knife trembled in my hands as I stood over his sleeping form. 20 years. 20 years of pain, humiliation, and silent screams that no one ever heard. Tonight, it would all end. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you the story of how I became both a victim and a survivor. How I went from being a scared little girl to a woman who finally found her voice. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. I was 8 years old when Uncle Marcus first moved into our house. Mom had just lost her job at the factory, and we were struggling to pay rent. When her older brother offered to help with expenses, she saw it as a blessing. I saw it as the beginning of my nightmare. "Sarah's grown up so much," he said that first night, his eyes lingering on me in a way that made my skin crawl. Mom just smiled, grateful for his generosity. She had no idea what kind of monster she'd just invited into our home. That first night, he came to my room after Mom fell asleep. "This is our little secret," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "If you tell anyone, your mom will lose the house, and it'll be all your fault." I was just a child. I believed him. For the next 20 years, Marcus made my life a living hell. During the day, he was the perfect uncle, helping with bills, fixing things around the house, bringing gifts. But at night, when the house was quiet, he became something else entirely. The worst part wasn't even the abuse itself. It was the way he made me, complicit in my own suffering. "You like this," he would say. "Look how your body responds." He twisted my natural reactions into proof of my guilt, making me believe I was somehow responsible for what he was doing to me. I tried to tell Mom once when I was 12. "Uncle Marcus makes me uncomfortable," I said, testing the waters. But she was so dependent on his help, so grateful for his presence, that she brushed off my concerns. "He's family, Sarah. He loves you. Don't be so sensitive." So I learned to stay silent. I learned to smile when he was around, to play the part of the grateful niece. Inside, I was dying a little more each day. What Marcus didn't know was that I was keeping a secret of my own. Starting when I was 16, I began writing everything down. Every incident, every date, every detail I could remember. I hid the notebooks in places he would never think to look. Inside old textbooks, taped under my desk drawer, even buried in a waterproof container in our small backyard. But the real secret was bigger than just documentation. I was getting stronger, both physically and mentally. While Marcus thought he had broken me, I was actually building myself up in ways he couldn't see. I started taking self-defense classes at the community center, telling Mom I wanted to get in shape. The instructor, Maria, was a former police officer who had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen. She never asked why I flinched when she corrected my stance, or why I sometimes had bruises I couldn't explain. She just taught me how to fight back. "Strength isn't just about muscles, Sarah," she told me one day after class. "It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it from you." I also threw myself into my studies. While Marcus tried to make me feel worthless, I was building a future he couldn't touch. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to college, and eventually became a social worker specializing in trauma counseling. The irony wasn't lost on me. By day, I was helping other survivors heal from abuse. By night, I was still trapped in the same cycle I'd been caught in since childhood. Marcus had aged, but his cruelty hadn't diminished. If anything, it had gotten worse as I grew older. He seemed to take pleasure in reminding me that no matter how successful I became, I would always be his victim. "Look at you, playing the hero at work," he would sneer. "But we both know what you really are, don't we?" Those words cut deeper than any physical wound. because part of me still believed him. Part of me still felt like that scared 8-year-old girl who thought she had no choice but to endure. But something was changing inside me. The work I did with other survivors was showing me truths I hadn't been able to see about my own situation. I was starting to understand that the shame I carried wasn't mine to bear. It was his. Every story I heard from my clients was like looking in a mirror. The self-blame, the fear, the feeling of being trapped. It was all so familiar. And as I helped them find their strength, I began to remember mine. One evening, after a particularly difficult session with a client who reminded me of my younger self, I came home to find Marcus waiting for me. Mom had gone to visit her sister for the weekend, leaving us alone in the house. "I've been thinking about you all day," he said, that familiar predatory smile spreading across his face. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't automatically shrink away. I stood in the doorway and really looked at him, not as the powerful figure who had terrorized me for decades, but as what he really was, a pathetic man who preyed on children because he was too weak to face anyone his own size. If you've ever felt powerless in your own life, if you've ever wondered if you could find the strength to change your circumstances, keep watching. Because what happened next changed everything. The confrontation that night was different from all the others. When Marcus reached for me, I stepped back and said something I'd never said before. "No." The word hung in the air between us, and for a moment, he looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression darkened. "You think you're too good for me now? With your fancy job and your college degree?" He grabbed my arm, his grip tighter than usual. "You're nothing without me. Your mother knows it, and deep down, you know it too." But I pulled away from him, something I'd never been able to do as a child. "I'm not 8 years old anymore, Marcus, and I'm not afraid of you." His face twisted with rage. "You should be, because if you think you can just walk away from this family, you're wrong. Your mother depends on me. She loves me. If you try to poison her against me, I'll make sure she knows exactly what kind of person you really are." That threat hit home because it revealed the depth of his manipulation. All these years, he'd been positioning himself as the family savior while painting me as the problem. Mom didn't just depend on him financially. He'd made himself indispensable to her emotionally as well. The next few weeks were torture. Marcus ramped up his psychological warfare, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. He would make subtle comments to Mom about my moods and how I seemed unstable lately. He suggested I was under too much stress at work, that maybe I needed to see a therapist. "I'm worried about Sarah," I heard him tell Mom one evening. "She's been saying some strange things lately. I think the work she does might be affecting her mental health." The cruel genius of it was that he was using my own profession against me. By suggesting I was having a breakdown, he was preemptively discrediting anything I might say about him. Mom, for her part, was caught in the middle without even knowing it. She'd come to me with concerned eyes, asking if I was okay, if work was too stressful, if I needed to talk to someone. Each conversation felt like a knife to the heart because I could see how much she genuinely cared, but also how thoroughly Marcus had poisoned the well. Meanwhile, at work, I was struggling to maintain my composure. My supervisor, Janet, noticed the change in my demeanor during team meetings. My usually confident presentations were shaky, and I'd started having panic attacks in the bathroom between client sessions. "Sarah, can I speak with you privately?" Janet asked me one Friday afternoon. We went to her office and she closed the door behind us. "I don't know what's going on in your personal life and you don't have to tell me. But I need you to know that whatever it is, you're not alone. And you're not as powerless as you might feel." Her words were like a lifeline, I wanted so badly to tell her everything, but the fear was still too strong. What if she didn't believe me? What if it affected my job? What if Marcus made good on his threats to destroy my relationship with Mom? That weekend, things came to a head. Mom had invited Marcus to Sunday dinner, as she did every week. I usually found excuses to be out of the house, but this time, she specifically asked me to be there. "I hardly see you anymore, honey," she said. "Marcus was saying how much he misses spending time with you." The thought of sitting across from him at our family table, pretending everything was normal, made me physically ill. But I agreed because I didn't know how to refuse without raising suspicions. Dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. Marcus played the role of the caring uncle perfectly, asking about my work, complimenting Mom's cooking, sharing funny stories from his childhood with Mom. To any outside observer, we would have looked like a happy, close-knit family. But under the table, he kept brushing his foot against my leg. When Mom went to the kitchen to get dessert, he leaned over and whispered, "You look beautiful tonight, Sarah, just like you did when you were little." I excused myself to the bathroom and threw up. When I came back, Mom was looking at me with worry. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart? You look pale." "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired from work." Marcus smiled sympathetically. "She's been pushing herself too hard. I keep telling her she needs to take better care of herself." The conversation continued around me, but I felt like I was drowning. Every word he spoke, every gesture of false concern was designed to further cement his position as the good guy while making me look unstable. After dinner, as Mom walked Marcus to his car, I stood at the kitchen window and watched them. They hugged goodbye, and I saw Mom pat his cheek affectionately. The sight filled me with such despair I had to grip the counter to stay upright. How could I possibly compete with 20 years of manipulation? How could I make Mom see the truth when he'd spent decades crafting the perfect lie? That night, lying in bed, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue living this double life, being slowly destroyed from the inside while maintaining the facade of normalcy. Or I could take a risk that might cost me everything but could finally set me free. The decision I made would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It started small, with tiny acts of rebellion that Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on. I began by changing the locks on my apartment. It was a symbolic gesture more than a practical one. Marcus had never actually entered my place uninvited, but it represented something important. For the first time in my adult life, I had a space that was completely mine. Next, I started therapy. Not because Marcus suggested it, but because I chose it. Dr. Elena Vasquez specialized in trauma recovery, and from our first session, I felt like I was finally speaking to someone who understood. Trauma isn't just about what happened to you, she explained during our third meeting. It's about what you believed about yourself because of what happened. Your uncle didn't just abuse your body, he programmed your mind to accept that abuse as normal, even deserved. Those sessions were brutal. Unpacking 20 years of conditioned responses and learned helplessness felt like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. But slowly, session by session, I began to see the difference between the truth and the lies I'd been told about myself. The real breakthrough came when Dr. Vasquez asked me to write a letter to my 8-year-old self. At first, I resisted. "What's the point?" I asked. "I can't change what happened." "You're not writing to change the past," she said. "You're writing to change your relationship with it." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank piece of paper, trying to find words for a conversation I'd never imagined having. Finally, I began to write. "Dear little Sarah, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You are not bad. You are not broken. and you do not deserve what's happening to you. You are brave and strong, even when you don't feel it. Someday, you will find your voice, and when you do, you will use it to help other little girls like you." I cried as I wrote those words, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing that scared little girl with compassion instead of shame. The letter marked a turning point. I started carrying myself differently at work, speaking up in meetings, taking on leadership roles I'd previously avoided. My confidence was growing, and people noticed. "You seem different lately," my colleague David commented after a particularly successful presentation. "More present." He was right. For the first time in my life, I was fully inhabiting my own body, my own space, my own voice. But the real test came at Christmas. Mom invited both Marcus and me to dinner, and I knew this would be the moment of truth. I couldn't keep avoiding family gatherings, but I also couldn't pretend anymore. I arrived at Mom's house with a plan. I'd discussed it extensively with Dr. Vasquez, and while she'd warned me about the potential consequences, she'd also supported my decision. The dinner started normally enough. Mom had made all my favorite foods, and the house smelled like cinnamon and pine from the Christmas tree. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember what it felt like to feel safe in this house, before Marcus had tainted every corner of it with his presence. Marcus was in fine form, playing the beloved uncle role to perfection. He brought expensive wine and thoughtful gifts. He complimented Mom's cooking and made her laugh with stories from work. To anyone watching, he was the ideal family member. But I wasn't 8 years old anymore, and I could see through the performance. When Mom went to check on the pie in the oven, Marcus leaned toward me with that familiar, predatory look. "You know, Sarah, you're looking very mature these days, very womanly." Instead of shrinking away as I'd done countless times before, I looked him directly in the eyes and said, loud enough for Mom to hear from the kitchen, "That's an inappropriate thing to say to your niece, Marcus." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, then calculated confusion. "I was just giving you a compliment, sweetheart. There's nothing inappropriate about telling my niece she's grown into a beautiful woman." But his recovery was too smooth, too practiced. And something in my tone had caught Mom's attention. She appeared in the doorway, looking between us with a puzzled expression. "Is everything okay in here?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the moment that would either free me or destroy my relationship with my mother forever. "Actually, Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. Something I should have told you years ago." Marcus's face went pale, but he quickly recovered. "Sarah, you seem upset. Maybe this isn't the best time." "No," I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "This is exactly the right time." I turned to face my mother, this woman who had unknowingly harbored a predator in her home for 20 years, who had trusted him with her most precious possession, her daughter. My heart broke for what I was about to put her through, but I knew that the truth, however painful, was the only way forward. "Mom, I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. Leave a like if you're proud of Sarah for finding her courage. Her journey is far from over." The words came out slowly at first, then faster, like water breaking through a dam. 20 years of secrets poured out in our family living room under the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree that Marcus had helped decorate just hours before. "Mom, Marcus has been sexually abusing me since I was 8 years old." The silence that followed was crushing. Mom's face went through a series of changes: confusion, disbelief, horror, and then something I hadn't expected. A flicker of recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle she'd never realized existed were suddenly clicking into place. Marcus immediately went into damage control mode. "Sarah, honey, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. The stress from your job, the trauma you deal with every day. It's obviously affecting your perception of reality." But I was ready for this. Dr. Vasquez and I had anticipated every possible response. "I have journals, Mom. 20 years of documentation, dates, times, details. I can tell you exactly what you were wearing the night he first came to my room. It was your blue robe with the coffee stain on the sleeve that you never could get out." Mom's hand flew to her throat. She remembered that robe. Marcus's strategy shifted. Even if Sarah believes these things happened, she's clearly not well. Memory is unreliable, especially when someone is under psychological strain. She needs professional help, not false accusations that could destroy our family. "I am getting professional help," I said calmly, "and my therapist supports my decision to finally tell the truth." The next hour was the longest of my life. Marcus alternated between denial, manipulation, and attempts to discredit my mental health. He reminded Mom of his years of financial support, his help around the house, his presence at every holiday and birthday. "Look at what I've done for this family," he pleaded. "Why would Sarah make up these horrible lies? She's sick, Emma. She needs help, not encouragement in these delusions." But Mom was listening to me now, really listening. Perhaps for the first time since I was 8 years old. I watched her face as memories resurfaced. Times when I'd tried to avoid being alone with Marcus. Instances when I'd seemed scared or withdrawn. Moments when my behavior hadn't made sense to her, but suddenly did. "Sarah," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in. "Because it didn't happen, Emma." She's confused, mixing up reality with the trauma cases she deals with at work. This is what happens when someone spends all day with disturbed people. Eventually, it affects their own mental state. But something had shifted in Mom's demeanor. She was no longer looking at Marcus with love and trust. She was studying him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "Get out," she said quietly. "Emma, please, don't let her sickness destroy our relationship. I love you both." "Get out." Mom's voice broke on the words. "Get out of my house right now." Marcus tried one more manipulation tactic. "If I leave now, Emma, I won't be coming back. You'll lose my help with the bills, the repairs, everything. Can you really afford to choose Sarah's delusions over the stability I've provided?" It was a calculated risk, and for a moment, I saw the fear in Mom's eyes. She was 62 years old, living on a fixed income, and Marcus's financial support had made her life significantly easier. But then she looked at me, really looked at me, and saw not the successful social worker I'd become, but the frightened little girl I'd once been. I said, "Get out. Now." After Marcus left, slamming the door behind him, Mom and I sat in her living room, surrounded by the wreckage of our Christmas celebration. The turkey was getting cold on the table, and the pie was probably burning in the oven, but neither of us moved. "I'm so sorry, baby," Mom whispered, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." We held each other and cried, for the childhood I'd lost, for the years of silence, for the trust that had been broken, and for the difficult journey ahead of us both. But even as we comforted each other, I knew this was just the beginning. Marcus wouldn't give up easily. He'd spent too many years building his image as the perfect brother and uncle to let it crumble without a fight. Sure enough, the phone started ringing the next morning. Marcus called repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. First, he tried the caring uncle approach, expressing concern for my mental health and offering to pay for therapy. When that didn't work, he switched to threats. "You have no idea what you've started, Sarah," he said in one particularly chilling message. "I have friends, connections, people who will believe me over a mentally unstable social worker. You think you can destroy me? I'll destroy you first." He also began a campaign to isolate Mom and me from the rest of the family. He called our relatives, carefully crafting a story about how I was having a breakdown and making false accusations. Some believed him. Others weren't sure what to think but didn't want to get involved. The worst part was that his threats weren't empty. Within a week, I received a call from my supervisor at work. "Sarah, I need to see you in my office immediately." Janet's face was grave when I arrived. "I've received some concerning information about your mental state. There are suggestions that you're experiencing some kind of psychological crisis, possibly related to transference issues with your clients." My heart sank. Marcus was using my own profession against me, suggesting that I was projecting my clients' experiences onto my own life. "Who told you this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A family member called, very concerned about your well-being. They suggested that you might benefit from immediate psychological evaluation and possibly a leave of absence." This was Marcus's master stroke. If he could get me removed from my job, especially on mental health grounds, it would destroy my credibility completely. Who would believe the accusations of someone who'd been deemed mentally unfit by her own employer? I realized then that telling the truth was only the first battle. The real war was just beginning. The next few months were the most challenging of my life, but they were also transformative in ways I never could have imagined. The first step was preserving my job. I knew that if I lost my position at the social services agency, Marcus would use it as evidence that I was mentally unstable. So I made a decision that took every ounce of courage I had. I told Janet everything. "I need you to understand something," I said, sitting across from her in her office with my hands shaking slightly. "The person who called you about my mental state is the same person I've been documenting abuse from for the past 20 years. Janet's expression shifted from concern to focused attention. As a seasoned supervisor in social services, she'd seen many cases of abuse and manipulation. She listened as I explained not just the abuse itself, but Marcus's sophisticated campaign to discredit me. "Do you have documentation?" she asked. I nodded and retrieved the journals I'd been keeping. Years of careful notation, written in my own hand, with dates and details that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse and recent escalation. Janet reviewed them carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page. "Sarah, this level of documentation suggests someone who is very much in touch with reality, not someone experiencing a psychological break. I'm going to recommend that you continue with your current caseload, but I want you to have weekly check-ins with our staff psychologist, not for evaluation, but for support." It was the first victory, but there were many battles ahead. Marcus escalated his efforts to discredit me. He filed a police report claiming I was harassing him with false accusations. He hired a lawyer and threatened to sue me for defamation. He even showed up at my apartment building, claiming he just wanted to talk and clear the air. But something had fundamentally changed in me. Each attack, instead of weakening my resolve, actually strengthened it. I was no longer the isolated 8-year-old girl who had to face this alone. I had my therapist, my supervisor, and most importantly, I had my mother's unwavering support. Mom surprised me with her strength during this period. After the initial shock wore off, she became fiercely protective. When relatives questioned my story or suggested I might be mistaken, she shut them down immediately. "My daughter is telling the truth," she would say firmly, "and anyone who can't accept that is not welcome in our lives." She also took practical steps that showed me she truly understood the gravity of what had happened. She changed her locks, installed a security system, and even got a restraining order when Marcus began showing up at her house uninvited. The turning point came 6 months after that Christmas dinner. I was working late at the office when I received a call that changed everything. "Sarah, this is Detective Martinez with the police department. I understand you filed a report about abuse by your uncle, Marcus Thompson." My heart raced. "Yes, but I thought it was too late to prosecute. The statute of limitations. That's what I'm calling about. We've received another report. A woman named Jennifer Collins says she was abused by Marcus Thompson when she was a child. Her story is remarkably similar to yours, and she mentioned seeing your police report in the system." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. "Another victim?" "We believe there may be more. Mr. Thompson worked at several schools and youth organizations over the years. We're reopening our investigation." Within weeks, 3 more women came forward. All had similar stories: childhood abuse by Marcus, threats to keep them quiet, and years of silence born from shame and fear. Together, our testimonies painted a picture of a serial predator who had operated with impunity for decades. The case that followed wasn't easy. Marcus hired an expensive defense team that tried every tactic in the book: character assassination, victim blaming, claims of false memory syndrome. But our combined testimonies, along with my detailed documentation, created a compelling case. During the trial, I had to recount the most traumatic experiences of my life in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Marcus sat at the defense table, sometimes shaking his head sadly as if dealing with a delusional relative, sometimes glaring at me with barely contained rage. But I was no longer afraid of him. Standing in that witness box, telling my truth in my own voice, I felt more powerful than I ever had in my life. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with a guilty verdict on multiple counts of child sexual abuse, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete vindication. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in prison. At his age, it was likely a life sentence. After the trial, Jennifer Collins approached me outside the courthouse. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd be brave enough to come forward, but seeing your courage gave me mine." That's when I realized that my healing journey had become something bigger than just my own recovery. It had become a catalyst for other survivors to find their voices. I started speaking at conferences and support groups, sharing my story not as a victim, but as a survivor who had reclaimed her power. Mom often came with me, adding her perspective as a mother who had unknowingly enabled abuse and had to face that difficult truth. The hardest thing I ever had to do was admit that I had failed to protect my child, she would tell audiences. But the most important thing I ever did was believe her when she finally told me the truth. Our relationship, which had been strained by years of secrets and manipulation, became stronger than ever. We went to family therapy together, working through the complex feelings of guilt, anger, and love that had been tangled up for so long. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I left my job at social services to start a nonprofit organization focused on supporting adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. "Why leave a stable job to start something from scratch?" my friend David asked when I told him my plans. "Because I've learned that sometimes the most important work we do isn't the safe work," I replied. "It's the work that scares us, but needs to be done." The organization, which I named Breaking Silence, started small. Just me, a borrowed office, and a determination to create the support system I wish I'd had as a child. We offered counseling services, legal advocacy, and most importantly, a safe space for survivors to share their stories without judgment. Within a year, we were helping dozens of survivors. Within 2 years, we had a staff of 12 and had expanded to 3 cities. The work was challenging, hearing trauma stories every day, fighting legal battles, dealing with institutions that preferred to protect perpetrators rather than victims. But it was also incredibly fulfilling. One afternoon, I was working in my office when my assistant buzzed me. "Sarah, there's a woman here who'd like to speak with you. She says she's been following your story in the news and thinks you might be able to help her." The woman who walked into my office looked to be about my age, with nervous eyes and trembling hands. "My name is Lisa," she said. "I was abused by my stepfather for 10 years, and I've never told anyone. But seeing what you've accomplished, I think maybe it's time." As I listened to Lisa's story, I felt a deep sense of purpose settle over me. This was why I had survived. This was why I had found my voice. Not just to save myself, but to help others do the same. Marcus had taken 20 years of my life, but he hadn't taken my future. He had tried to define me by what he did to me, but I had chosen to define myself by what I did in response to it. Today, 5 years after that Christmas dinner, when I finally told my truth, I can say with certainty that the scared little girl who once believed she was powerless was wrong. We are never as powerless as we think we are. We are never as alone as we feel. And it is never too late to reclaim our voices, our dignity, and our lives. The knife I mentioned at the beginning of this story, I never used it. Not because I wasn't angry enough, but because I realized that the best revenge against someone who tries to destroy you is to build a life so full of purpose and joy that they become irrelevant. Marcus thought he had won by silencing me for 20 years, but my silence was never his victory. It was just my preparation for the moment when my voice would matter most. If my story has touched your heart, if it's given you hope or courage or just the knowledge that you're not alone, please share it. Because somewhere out there is someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, that healing is real, and that speaking truth to power can change everything. Every survivor who finds their voice makes it easier for the next person to find theirs. Together, we're not just breaking our own silence. We're breaking the silence that protects predators and perpetuates abuse. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful revenge of all.